Welcome to True Echo, where untold stories rise and justice echoes louder than silence. In today's episode, one young woman's quiet defiance shattered an entire system. When a 26-year-old black CEO was asked to give up her rightful first-class seat for a wealthier, older white woman, she didn't argue. She made a single phone call that changed aviation history. What unfolded next stunned everyone on board. Stay with us as we reveal how one seat became a battlefield for dignity, power, and a new generation's right to belong. The early morning sun cast golden streaks across JFK International Airport as travelers bustled through the glass-domed terminal. Amid the hum of rolling luggage and boarding announcements, a young woman walked alone, her steps confident, her expression calm but focused. Dressed in a crisp black suit with a navy carry-on in hand, Jasmine Carter moved with purpose. At just 26, she was already the CEO of a rising tech startup, and today wasn't just another business trip, it was a milestone. She paused beneath the glowing departure board and spotted her flight, SkyWest 307 to Los Angeles, Gate B18, on time. Her heart thumped a little faster. Today, she would fly out to finalize her first international contract, a multi-million-dollar deal that could propel her company, Starlink Solutions, onto the global stage. Every line of code she'd overseen, every sleepless night spent pitching investors, and every sneer she'd once endured as a barista with ambition now pulsed in her memory. She clutched her first-class boarding pass for Seat 1A like it was gold. To anyone else, it might just be paper. To Jasmine, it was a symbol of every barrier she'd broken through. She had earned that seat, on merit, not favors, not luck, and certainly not because of anyone's expectations. Years ago, she would have been invisible in a terminal like this. She remembered studying on train rides, working cafe shifts until 2 a.m., being told by polished executives in internships that she should start small. Jasmine Carter had started small, but she didn't stay there. As she entered the priority boarding line, her calm began to harden into resolve. She could already feel the glances, some curious, some dismissive, most surprised. In her tailored suit, with her coiled hair pinned neatly and her soft rose lipstick, Jasmine looked every bit the part of the rising star she had become. But her skin, her youth, and her solo presence marked her as different in a space long dominated by age, wealth, and whiteness. She boarded quietly, offering a smile to the flight attendants, then stepped into the hushed luxury of first class. As she reached Seat 1A, she gently set her carry-on beneath the seat, placed her sleek leather folder on her lap, and leaned back into the plush cream upholstery. Through the window, the sky hinted at promise. Jasmine pulled out her tablet and opened the contract she'd be signing in just hours. 7 figures. 5 nations. 1 signature. A smile tugged at her lips, her mother's voice echoing in her memory, "Never let them take what you've earned, baby. They'll try, but you stand tall." Just then, the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. She heard the deliberate click of heels, fast, firm, rehearsed. 2 women entered first class, dressed like royalty but with eyes sharper than diamonds. The taller one was Evelyn Stokes, owner of a luxury restaurant chain and a Platinum Elite member. She was flanked by her close companion, Linda Miller, whose tight smile could curdle milk. They scanned the cabin like they owned it. Evelyn's eyes landed on Jasmine. Her expression flickered, a cocktail of confusion, disdain, and something more dangerous, entitlement. "They must have made a mistake," Evelyn whispered, loud enough for several passengers to hear. "Seat 1A is always mine." Linda smirked and nodded in agreement. Jasmine felt the weight of their gaze like a spotlight, but she didn't look up. She adjusted the brightness on her screen and sipped her water calmly. She knew what this was. Not a seat dispute. Not even a mix-up. It was a test of how much confidence she had in her place. Evelyn walked over, towering above her. "Excuse me, dear," she said with patronizing civility. "I believe there's been a mix-up. 1A is my seat." Jasmine looked up, expression even, voice soft. "There's no mix-up. I booked this seat over a month ago. I'm happy to show you my boarding pass. She extended it gently. Evelyn didn't even glance at it. Sweetheart, she said, forcing a thin smile, you may not understand how these things work. Platinum Elite members, like myself, have priority. They probably overbooked and gave you this seat by mistake. I'm sure there's another one just as nice. Jasmine's heart beat harder, but her voice didn't waver. I understand perfectly. But I paid for this seat, and I'll be staying here. First class had gone completely still. Linda folded her arms and leaned against a seat, watching like a hawk. From across the aisle, a middle-aged man cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. A woman in pearls clutched her designer bag a little tighter. Jasmine felt the air thickening, expectation, judgment, pressure. All the invisible signals telling her to yield. But she didn't move. Evelyn's smile faded. Well, you must be new to this level of service, she said icily. I've flown this route every month for years. 1A is always mine. Jasmine turned fully toward her. Then perhaps it's time for a change. Her voice wasn't loud, but it hit the cabin like a thunderclap. Evelyn's jaw clenched. Linda glanced at the flight attendant nearby, subtly calling for backup. Jasmine returned to her tablet as if the matter were closed. But it wasn't. Within moments, the lead flight attendant appeared, a man named Greg, courteous but clearly anxious. He crouched next to Jasmine. Ma'am, I apologize for the confusion. May I see your boarding pass again? Jasmine handed it over. Seat 1A. Booked and confirmed, he read, then looked up nervously. Would you possibly consider moving to 3C? We'd be happy to offer you a voucher and an upgrade on your next flight. Jasmine held his gaze. No, thank you. I chose this seat. I'm not moving. From behind, Evelyn interjected. Greg, she's being unreasonable. You know this isn't how we do things in first class. Linda added quietly, you're very young. Perhaps just be flexible this time. People like Evelyn have worked decades to earn this. Jasmine's reply was even and unshakable, so have I. Greg stood helplessly. I'll speak to the flight manager. As he turned away, Jasmine knew the moment was far from over. But she also knew one thing for certain. This seat wasn't just hers by reservation. It was hers by right. The moments following Greg's departure dragged on, thick with unease. Jasmine could feel the ripple of murmurs from nearby passengers, low whispers, exchanged glances, and the unmistakable stir of people bracing for a scene. Still, she kept her posture upright and calm, her eyes returning to her tablet though her focus now floated far from its glowing screen. Every inch of her being knew this was no longer about a seat. It hadn't been since Evelyn first opened her mouth. This was about status, about old power meeting new defiance. About people like Jasmine, young, black, successful, being forced to explain, prove, and then apologize for daring to sit where they belonged. From her periphery, she saw Evelyn pacing in the aisle like a lioness in heels. Her voice, though hushed, dripped with condescension as she muttered to Linda, they hand out first-class seats like candy now. No standards. Linda nodded, her expression a blend of smugness and pity. She should know her place. This is just, awkward for everyone. Jasmine didn't flinch. She was used to this kind of rhetoric, backhanded civility used as a weapon. She'd endured it during her first startup pitch, when an investor asked if she was the assistant. She'd heard it in the university hallway when classmates assumed she was on a scholarship because of diversity quotas. But today was different. Today, she had a voice. And the weight of thousands like her behind it. Then came the click of polished shoes. Deborah Lane, flight manager, strode into the first-class cabin with the air of someone used to fixing problems without disrupting the peace. Mid-40s, clipped tone, sharp eyes. She glanced quickly between Jasmine and Evelyn, assessing with the precision of someone who'd done this too many times before. "Miss Carter," Deborah said smoothly, "we understand this may feel frustrating, and I want to assure you we're doing everything we can to make the flight comfortable for all our first-class passengers." Jasmine folded her hands calmly on her lap. "Then I'm sure you understand that I've booked and paid for this seat. I've shown my documentation. I have no plans to move." A flicker of irritation passed through Deborah's carefully neutral expression. She tried again. "Would you be willing to switch to another first-class seat? We'd provide a substantial travel voucher for the inconvenience and extend platinum status for a year." Jasmine's eyes locked on Deborah's. "If I were a 50-year-old white man in a Brooks Brothers suit, would you be asking me to move?" The question landed like a thunderclap in the hush. Deborah blinked, caught off guard. For a split second, she didn't answer. Linda let out a quiet scoff. Evelyn's mouth dropped open in disbelief. "Excuse me?" Evelyn spat. "Are you implying this is about race?" Jasmine didn't reply to her. Her gaze remained on Deborah, unwavering. It was a challenge, a mirror held up to a system long blind to its own biases. Deborah hesitated, then composed herself. "Miss Carter, we ask passengers to be flexible to preserve the harmony of the flight. That's all." "Harmony," Jasmine repeated, her voice level. "So harmony means asking the only young black woman in this cabin to yield her rightful seat to preserve the comfort of others? Is that what Sky West stands for?" Passengers squirmed in their seats. A few looked away, suddenly fascinated by the contents of their phones. Others stared, riveted, sensing the storm wasn't over. Evelyn lost what little restraint she had left. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, stepping closer to Jasmine's seat. "You think buying a ticket makes you equal to those of us who've supported this airline for decades? You don't belong in 1A, sweetie. You belong where you came from." Gasps, soft, but audible, rippled through the cabin. Even Linda looked uneasy now, her composure cracking. Jasmine's heart thundered, but she showed no fear. She knew Evelyn had just made a fatal mistake, crossed the line from arrogance into something more sinister and publicly unacceptable. She took a breath, then slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen once, twice. A name lit up, Marcus Reed. A man's voice answered after a single ring. Calm, steady, powerful. "Marcus, it's Jasmine. I'm on flight 307. I'm experiencing an incident involving discrimination and entitlement in first class. Could you look into it for me?" The cabin turned to stone. Marcus Reed, board member of Sky West Airlines, wasn't just Jasmine's college friend. He was the kind of man whose name made corporate vice presidents nervous. From her seat, Jasmine kept her tone even, but her words rang with quiet thunder. "Yes, I have all the documentation. I'm in 1A. I'll wait right here while you escalate this." "Thank you." She hung up. Slowly, she placed the phone back into her pocket. Deborah went pale. Greg, returning from the galley, looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, her armor cracked. She turned to Linda, whispering, "She can't possibly." But Jasmine didn't look at them. She turned her eyes back to the window, as calm and immovable as a mountain. Whatever came next, she was ready. Because today, 1A didn't just belong to her, it belonged to every young woman who'd been told to sit down, stay quiet, and give way. And she was done moving. The atmosphere in first class was no longer simply tense, it had curdled into a quiet, crackling chaos. No one moved. The cabin, once filled with the subtle clinking of champagne flutes and rustling newspapers, now simmered in anticipation. All eyes, though furtively cast, were locked on one person, Jasmine Carter. She sat motionless, fingers interlaced over her tablet, her gaze resting out the window. She wasn't gloating. There was no smug satisfaction on her face. Only an unmistakable steadiness, like the calm eye of a hurricane. The crew, however, was unraveling. Greg Parker, the lead flight attendant, returned to the galley with wide eyes and clenched fists. Deborah Lane followed, whispering urgently as they ducked behind the curtain that separated first class from the prep area. "You said she was bluffing," Greg hissed. "I thought she was." Deborah snapped back, her voice low and sharp. "Who just calls a board member mid-boarding?" Greg paced. "She said Marcus Reed. If that's true, we're not just looking at a write-up. We're looking at suspension, or worse." Deborah ran a hand through her hair. "We have to act like professionals. Keep control. It's one phone call. Nothing's happened yet. But something had happened. Something irreversible." Back in the cabin, Evelyn sat rigid, arms crossed so tightly her diamond-studded fingers turned white at the knuckles. Her carefully sculpted facade of control was cracking. She looked nothing like the polished socialite who had breezed onto the plane minutes ago. Instead, she looked cornered. Linda leaned toward her. "We may have overstepped," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Evelyn turned slowly, lips tight. "Don't you dare turn on me now." Linda said nothing, but her eyes betrayed her unease. A soft chime rang from the overhead PA system. The captain's voice came on, casual but composed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a short delay due to a procedural review. Please remain seated and we'll update you shortly." The delay had a name, though no one dared speak it: Jasmine Carter. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then, without fanfare, the first-class cabin doors parted again. 2 people stepped through. They didn't look like flight crew. They didn't wear the polished smiles of attendants. These 2 carried corporate weight. Brian Foster, the Eastern Region Operations Director for Sky West Airlines, stood tall in a dark suit, eyes scanning the cabin with piercing authority. Next to him walked Samantha Collins, Head of Service Ethics and Compliance, petite, razor-sharp, and known internally as the Scalpel. She didn't talk often. But when she did, careers changed. The effect was immediate. Deborah emerged from the galley looking like she'd swallowed glass. Greg stood behind her, stiff as a statue. Brian didn't waste words. "Lead flight attendant Greg Parker and flight manager Deborah Lane," he said in a low but carrying voice, "please follow us to the briefing room for immediate debrief and internal review." Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Even the most seasoned business travelers now looked unnerved. Deborah faltered, her lips trembling. "Sir, I was just trying to." "Now," Brian said. "Not cruel. Not loud. Just final." They followed him out. The door clicked shut behind them, and it felt like a gavel hitting the courtroom floor. Back in the cabin, Evelyn could barely sit still. Her foot tapped against her carry-on, her jaw clenched so tightly it visibly shook. She shot a desperate glance at Linda. "They wouldn't dare punish us for this," she hissed. "I spend more on this airline in a year than most people make. I know their vice presidents by name." Linda didn't answer. Her eyes were on Jasmine now, studying her not with disdain, but awe. Jasmine, for her part, didn't even turn her head. She remained still, composed. But her phone buzzed silently in her lap. One new message from Marcus Reed. "Debrief has started. Expect a resolution within the hour. You did the right thing. And they know it." She smiled faintly. Not a triumphant smile, but the kind born of long suffering, the kind that said, "Finally." 30 minutes passed in brittle silence. Every breath in the cabin seemed shallow. Every cough or rustle was a disruption. The clock ticked towards something no one could name, but all knew was coming. Then the door opened again. Brian Foster and Samantha Collins stepped back into the cabin, followed, not by Deborah or Greg, but by 2 uniformed security officers. Their faces unreadable. Brian stood in the aisle and looked each passenger dead in the eye before speaking. Effective immediately, flight crew members Greg Parker and Deborah Lane are suspended pending full investigation for violating SkyWest's non-discrimination policies and failing to uphold the rights of a confirmed first-class passenger. A gasp broke the room's silence. They will be escorted off this aircraft immediately, he continued. Additionally, new flight staff will replace them before takeoff. Greg appeared first, his expression pale and hollow. Behind him, Deborah followed, eyes on the floor, her body slumped in defeat. As they passed Jasmine's seat, neither looked at her. But Jasmine looked at them. Not in spite. Not in vengeance. With clarity. With quiet power. The cabin door closed once more. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was transformational. Because in that moment, a new order had arrived. As the cabin door sealed shut once more, it wasn't just the end of a personnel shuffle, it felt like a page turning in real time. The power dynamic had shifted. A quiet, almost reverent stillness settled over first class. No more side glances. No more whispered judgments. Jasmine Carter remained seated in 1A, calm as ever, her very presence now rewriting the rules that had once kept people like her out. Across the aisle, Evelyn Stokes looked shell-shocked. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, hands frozen on her designer purse, her shoulders hunched like a queen stripped of her crown. Linda Miller sat beside her, staring blankly ahead, her mind visibly running through damage control scenarios. But nothing would undo what had just unfolded. The old guard had been called out and silenced. For Jasmine, there was no celebration. No dramatic gesture or smug glance around the cabin. Just stillness. Purposeful, powerful stillness. Her breath came slowly. She'd made her call. She'd stood her ground. Now the world would do what it would. The silence was interrupted by the light click of heels on the carpeted aisle. Samantha Collins, sharp-eyed, professionally composed, approached Jasmine with a clipboard in one hand and something unmistakably respectful in her expression. "Miss Carter," she said, her voice quiet enough not to carry too far, "on behalf of SkyWest Airlines and the board, I'd like to personally apologize for what you experienced. Your actions were measured, professional, and principled. That kind of strength doesn't go unnoticed." Jasmine nodded slightly. "Thank you. But I didn't do this for recognition." "I understand," Samantha said. "But justice needs examples. You were one." She handed Jasmine a small, sleek envelope. Inside was a personal letter from the SkyWest CEO and a notice, 2 years of complimentary first-class travel on any domestic or international route. But the most important line was buried halfway down the page. Effective immediately, all SkyWest crew must undergo bias and equity training. Passenger treatment will be assessed on fairness, not tenure, status, or assumptions. A policy change, born from a confrontation over a single seat. Samantha offered a respectful bow. "We're rebuilding the system, Miss Carter. Thanks to you, it starts now." As she walked away, Jasmine exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. She looked out the window at the fading sun, its rays casting a golden shimmer across the tarmac. For a brief moment, her thoughts returned to her mother, who once held her in a cramped apartment kitchen and whispered, "Baby, the world won't always be kind. But don't you ever let them tell you where you do or don't belong." Today, Jasmine had honored that promise. Not just to her mother, but to every young person fighting invisible battles. Suddenly, Evelyn snapped. She shot to her feet, her voice slicing through the air like a blade. "This is outrageous. I've flown this airline for 20 years. I spend more in a month than she probably makes in a year. You can't humiliate me like this." The entire cabin turned. Linda tugged her arm. "Evelyn, please, not now." But Evelyn had crossed the line between embarrassment and fury. She pointed directly at Jasmine, voice trembling with indignation. You think you're a hero? You think you're better than me because you made a call? This was my seat. It always was. And people like me built this airline. I'll sue everyone in here. No one came to her defense. Not one passenger. Not even Linda. A younger businessman cleared his throat and looked away in disgust. A woman 2 rows down shook her head slowly, murmuring, "Enough." Jasmine remained seated, her expression unchanged. She didn't need to respond. Her silence was louder than Evelyn's tantrum. Samantha Collins reappeared, accompanied by 2 quiet but firm security officers. "Ms. Stokes," Samantha said evenly. "Your behavior is now disruptive. Your Platinum Elite status is hereby revoked permanently. You will not be flying with us today, or again in the future." Evelyn's mouth dropped open, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't do this to me. I know people." "Yes," Samantha replied coolly. "And so do we. Rules are rules." As security approached, Evelyn shrieked something unintelligible and stormed down the aisle. Her heels clicked in fury. Her threats bounced off silence. Her exit was not triumphant, it was pathetic. And the cabin door clicked shut behind her like the final punctuation in a long, overdue sentence. And with that, the storm was over. The remaining passengers slowly returned to their seats. Heads turned, some toward Jasmine, others bowed in quiet contemplation. A few offered subtle nods. One woman, elderly and silver-haired, leaned forward and softly said, "Thank you, dear. For all of us." Jasmine smiled, not out of pride, but out of understanding. The ripple had begun. As the engines roared to life and the plane began to taxi, Jasmine opened her laptop again and stared at the 7-figure contract on her screen. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was about legacy. About opening doors that were never meant to stay shut. The plane lifted off with a slow, graceful ascent, but in Jasmine Carter's heart, the moment felt symbolic. The roar of the engines muffled the lingering weight of the confrontation, the tension melting into the clouds below. She stared out the window, watching the lights of New York fade into the distance, and breathed a quiet sigh of both relief and renewal. She had won. Not by yelling. Not by fighting. But by standing still in the truth. Seat 1A was no longer just a seat, it was a statement. The hum of first class resumed its rhythm, but the energy had changed. A middle-aged woman who had earlier pulled her handbag closer when Jasmine sat down now turned with a gentle smile. "I misjudged you," she admitted softly. "Thank you for, well, everything." Jasmine gave a respectful nod. "It wasn't just for me." Across the aisle, Linda Miller sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, deflated. No longer the composed puppet master behind Evelyn, her eyes now darted between her folded hands and Jasmine, unsure of herself. A tremor of regret lingered on her face. For the first time, she seemed to recognize the damage done by her silence. Eventually, Linda stood and crossed the aisle. Several passengers turned to watch. "I want to apologize," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't speak up when I should have. I let my loyalty to someone else outweigh what was obviously wrong. I can't take it back, but I see it now. And I'm sorry." Jasmine studied her for a long moment. She didn't want to offer empty forgiveness. But she also understood the deeper power of accountability. "Sometimes," Jasmine replied, "seeing it is the first step. Speaking it is the next." Linda gave a small, tearful nod before retreating to her seat. The apology wasn't perfect. But it was real. And that mattered. The new flight crew, younger and noticeably more diverse, moved efficiently through the aisle. They treated every passenger with equal respect, their professionalism wrapped in sincerity. One young black flight attendant, no more than 25, paused by Jasmine with a subtle smile. I saw what you did, she whispered. We talk about stuff like this in the break room all the time. But nobody ever stands up the way you did. I didn't plan to, Jasmine admitted. But I couldn't sit quietly either. Well, the attendant said, her eyes lighting up, now we won't have to either. That sentiment lingered in the air like the warm scent of brewed coffee, comforting and invigorating. Jasmine returned to her tablet, fingers gliding across the contract she would soon sign in Los Angeles. But her mind was on something bigger than business now. She pulled up her email, typed quickly, and sent a message to her assistant, Tyra. Subject, new project. Let's create an initiative, something that trains companies on equity, respect, and leadership from the bottom up. Not just talks, but systems. If yesterday was about winning contracts, today's about building something that outlasts me. Just as she hit send, her phone vibrated again. Marcus Reed. Board just approved our internal equity audit. Training protocols are changing. Your name's already trending in aviation circles. You've done more than speak, you've changed the system. She leaned back into her seat, letting that reality sink in. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a much wider ripple. The plane began its descent hours later into LAX. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in pinks and golds, the landing felt surreal. Jasmine had taken off as a young CEO on her way to sign a major deal. She was landing as the woman who'd redefined what it meant to claim space, without apology. Once the plane stopped taxiing, passengers stood slowly, gathering their things. But instead of the usual rush, several lingered to offer Jasmine nods, smiles, and quiet acknowledgments. One white-haired man paused at her seat. I've flown for 40 years, he said. I've seen a lot. But I've never seen someone so young carry that much dignity under pressure. You reminded me today of who I used to be, before I got comfortable. Maybe it's time to get uncomfortable again, Jasmine said with a gentle grin. He laughed, tipped his head, and moved on. When Jasmine finally stepped out of the plane, the fresh air on the jet bridge hit her like a baptism. It wasn't just oxygen, it was freedom. A sense that her feet weren't just walking into a terminal, but into something far larger than herself. At baggage claim, her driver waited with a placard, and behind him, a security officer from Sky West headquarters discreetly nodded. They wanted to make sure your arrival went smoothly, he said. And the CEO asked me to deliver this. He handed her a black folder embossed with the Sky West logo. Inside, an official apology letter from the CEO. The reinstatement of new flight crew policies. And a certificate establishing a scholarship in her name for underrepresented youth entering aviation management. She didn't expect tears, but they welled up anyway. Because this was what power looked like. Not dominance. Not privilege. But legacy. Jasmine stepped into the California sunlight outside LAX, the city humming with its usual chaotic grace. Cars whooshed past the terminal curbside, drivers honked, luggage rolled, life went on. But for Jasmine Carter, everything had changed. Her footsteps down the concrete felt like strides into a new chapter, one paved by resolve, and one that others could now follow. The black town car pulled up with tinted windows and polished chrome. Her driver, a sharply dressed young man named Carlos, greeted her with professional warmth. Miss Carter, he said, holding the door open. It's an honor to have you in LA. Heard the whole story. You've inspired a lot of people today. Jasmine gave him a nod, slipping inside with her laptop bag. Let's hope it sticks. As they cruised through the palm-lined avenues toward the tech campus in Santa Monica, Jasmine's phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Marcus or a Sky West official. It was her publicist. Publicist. CNN, Forbes, and The Atlantic have reached out. They want exclusive interviews. Hashtag Jasmine in 1A is trending at number 3 worldwide. We need to talk media strategy ASAP. Jasmine blinked. She'd only wanted to stand her ground. She hadn't intended to start a movement, but maybe it was inevitable. People were tired. Tired of invisible rules. Tired of being told to yield because of race, age, or status. And her calm resistance had lit the match. At the Starlink Solutions office, her team was waiting: Tyra, her assistant, Mitchell, her CTO, and a half-dozen interns who'd watched the headlines explode in real time. As she stepped into the glass-walled boardroom, the group erupted in spontaneous applause. Tyra ran up with tears in her eyes. "You didn't just win a deal," she said breathlessly. "You broke the ceiling for every one of us." Jasmine smiled, but quickly shifted the focus. "All right, let's keep our eyes on the mission. We signed this contract today. And after that, we build." The contract signing was swift and ceremonial. The international partner, a German robotics firm, had flown in for the occasion. Their executive team congratulated Jasmine, their words cautious at first, but gradually infused with genuine admiration as the story unfolded. After the final pen stroke, the CEO of the partner firm leaned over. "I wasn't sure what to expect," he admitted. "But what you did, that wasn't just leadership. That was cultural impact. We're proud to do business with someone who doesn't flinch under pressure." Jasmine smiled. Leadership means doing the hard thing when the easy one is expected. That night, back at her hotel suite, Jasmine finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sat by the window, overlooking the ocean, her phone dimmed, her shoes off, the silence both unfamiliar and welcome. But then, another buzz. This time, a video. Sent by Marcus. It showed Samantha Collins standing in a Sky West conference room, speaking to a group of employees, flight crews, operations staff, supervisors. Behind her, a presentation read, "Equity in Action, Phase 1 Implementation." She was citing Jasmine's name. Using her story as the training model. Across the screen, employees were nodding, taking notes, engaging in active conversation. Real change was happening. Policy wasn't just written, it was being taught. A second message followed. "Marcus. Thought you should see how it's already making waves. We've scheduled a board-level roundtable on equity across all departments. I'll have you speak if you're willing. This isn't just aviation anymore. You're the spark." She stared at the message, then at the glowing skyline. It wasn't about revenge. It had never been about putting Evelyn Stokes or Deborah Lane in their place. It was about drawing a line in the sand, and making sure that no one else ever had to stand alone in that same fire again. She opened her notes app and jotted a sentence for the speech she knew she'd give someday soon. "Fairness is not a seat someone gives you when they're done using it. Fairness is you sitting down in the seat you earned, and refusing to move." Her eyes burned. But this time, it wasn't sadness or anger. It was pride. It was knowing. Later that week, Jasmine appeared on a nationally syndicated morning show. She wore a sharp emerald green blazer, minimal jewelry, and her natural curls pinned to the side. The interviewer leaned in with curiosity. "Jasmine," she asked, "when Evelyn told you to move, weren't you scared?" Jasmine smiled gently. "I was. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't say anything. Because silence allows injustice to survive. I didn't fight to sit in 1A just for myself. I did it because I knew there were millions of people watching who've been asked to move, to wait, to be silent. I sat there for them too." That quote would go viral. And the movement grew. Young women began posting photos in first class with the caption #rightful-seat. Corporations began re-evaluating their own internal equity training. Articles were published about how the Jasmine effect was reshaping business etiquette, airline policy, and customer service. Even Evelyn Stokes issued a public apology, stiff and lawyer-approved, yes, but it was something. A relic of a past trying desperately to survive in a world that had changed while it slept. Jasmine watched it all unfold with a quiet sense of responsibility. She didn't seek fame. But now that it had come, she intended to use it. Because no one rises alone. And the moment she refused to give up her seat, she created a space for countless others to rise with her. Weeks passed, but the resonance of that single flight refused to fade. Jasmine Carter's name had transcended tech startup circles and crept into mainstream headlines, op-eds, business school case studies, and dinner table conversations. Her quiet refusal to yield that first-class seat had become more than a personal stand, it was now cultural shorthand for self-worth in the face of systemic bias. People began referring to similar moments in their lives as, my 1A moment. Journalists, activists, and even corporate HR directors used the term like gospel. But for Jasmine, it was never about labels. It was about change. One Friday afternoon, she received an invitation. From the White House Office of Public Engagement. Subject, Women in Leadership Roundtable, you're invited. She blinked. The invitation was real. A week later, Jasmine found herself standing in a mahogany-paneled room, seated among mayors, CEOs, senators, and thought leaders. But she wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to speak truth. To tell them what it felt like to sit in a chair you earned, only to be told you didn't look the part. When the microphone was passed to her, she stood, adjusted her blazer, and said, "Every one of us will, at some point, be asked, politely or otherwise, to give up our seat. To yield to someone who belongs more than we do. But I learned that day on Flight 307 that the most powerful word in leadership isn't yes. It's no. No, I won't move. No, I won't make room for entitlement. No, I won't bow to a system built without me. Because real change begins the moment we choose to sit down and stay seated in spaces we've earned, no matter how uncomfortable that makes others." The room went silent. Not with judgment, but reverence. Later that evening, as Jasmine walked along the Potomac River reflecting on the surreal twists of her year, her phone buzzed again. This time it was her mother, calling from back in Brooklyn. "Baby," her mother said softly. "I saw you on the news again. And I just wanted to say. I remember when we didn't even have a car to take you to your interviews. And now, you're leading boardrooms." Jasmine smiled, her voice catching in her throat. "I remembered your voice on that plane, Mama. Telling me not to let them take what I've earned." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "You didn't just hold your seat. You made room for others, too." That night, Jasmine sat in her apartment in Los Angeles, barefoot, a cup of tea in hand, scrolling through messages from students, travelers, pilots, teachers, and strangers from around the world. "I sat in the front row of my college lecture today for the first time. I reported a supervisor who kept skipping over me for promotion. I didn't move when they asked me to. And they backed down. Thank you for showing us how to sit still and stand tall." In the days that followed, SkyWest Airlines launched a full rebranding campaign. The face of it? Not Jasmine, she declined. But a montage of young travelers, first-time flyers, retirees, Black, Asian, Latina, disabled, queer, all proudly sitting in their own 1A moments. The voiceover simply said, "Fairness has no seat assignment. It lives wherever courage chooses to sit." And then came one final moment. Jasmine was flying again. This time, not to finalize a deal or attend a conference. She was going to visit her mother back in Brooklyn, no cameras, no spotlight. At the gate, she scanned her ticket. First class, as always. But just before she stepped onto the plane, she noticed a small group of teenage girls at the corner of the terminal. They were huddled around a tablet, watching her interview. One of them gasped and nudged her friend. "That's her. The woman from seat 1A. They all turned to look, wide-eyed and a little in awe. Jasmine walked over, smiling warmly. "You girls headed somewhere exciting?" We're flying to DC, one replied. School Leadership Summit. We're part of a young women's business group. Good for you, Jasmine said, handing one of them a signed notebook from her bag. Here's something for the journey. As she walked away, she heard one of the girls whisper, I'm gonna sit in the front today. No matter what. Jasmine smiled. She boarded the plane. Sat in 1A. And this time, no one said a word. No stares. No whispers. No challenges. Just quiet respect. Because that's what happens when one person has the courage to sit, and stay seated. The world slowly, then suddenly, starts making room. And so, Jasmine Carter, the girl who once worked late shifts to pay for textbooks, the CEO who refused to yield to old money and older rules, now soared forward, unshaken. Because she hadn't just earned a seat. She'd earned a movement. Jasmine Carter's journey reminds us that leadership isn't just about titles, it's about courage. In a world built on silent hierarchies, sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is, I deserve to be here. So the next time someone tries to move you, literally or figuratively, ask yourself, is this my 1A moment? Because fairness is not about who sat there first. It's about who earned the right to stay. If Jasmine's story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own moments of defiance, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you claimed your rightful seat. Subscribe to True Echo for more powerful, real-world stories that challenge injustice and amplify voices that must be heard. And remember, never let anyone take your place. Not in first class. Not in life.